Hey, sports card fans, it's John, Wade Boggs fan. Hope you're all doing well. This week, Greg over at MidLife Sports Cards has asked everyone, what are your hobby predictions for 2025? Now, in the description of this video, I have the link to Greg's Monday video in which he goes over the responses for his question from last week and then poses this question for everyone for this week's question. Now, I jotted down some notes here and I broke down my thoughts, predictions, things to keep an eye out for into two different areas. One, the ultra modern side of the hobby, and then the other, the vintage side of the hobby. So I want to talk first about the ultra modern side of the hobby. Now, I admit this really isn't my playground within the overall hobby. Really, the only thing I deal with ultra modern cards are some Wade Boggs cards that come out in some of the new releases. But I've seen, read, watched, different videos and things about the ultra modern hobby. So I have a little bit of an idea of some of the things that have been going on. So I want to give a little bit of some predictions, or again, things to keep an eye out for. And a lot of it involves around Topps and Fanatics, and mainly flippers and investors. And so first, in terms of Topps and Fanatics, how are they going to handle their allocations in terms of main distributors, breakers, local card shops, retail? Are they going to expand their allocations into certain areas? Are they going to put additional limits on other avenues that people within the hobby, where can they get access to the cards? Are they going to have to go through just some of the major distributors? How will some of their local card shops be affected by some of the allocation? And how will breakers play a part in the allocation of new product? So that's one thing to keep an eye on. The other thing is, and I believe this is correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think for 2025, Topps/Panini still won't have all the full licenses yet for some of the sports. I think Panini may still have, at least in 2025, some of the rights for licenses and so on. So it'll be interesting to see what the hobby and those that are involved in the ultra modern side of the hobby, how they take some of the new product. I've seen some comments about some of the pajama cards that Topps released in 2024 because they didn't have the full licensing, and I'm not sure if they were that well received. So it'll be interesting to see if there's additional products in 2025 that the Fanatics doesn't have the full license for, and how those cards will be received within the hobby. Next is, and I'm calling this a sort of like a frustration with more flippers and investors, is over 10s, PSA 10s within the market for new cards that are graded. I think it was Eric, those back pages, that did a recent video lamenting that for this year's Topps flagship product, Topps is no longer going to be including a black parallel version. And my understanding is the black parallel versions are very popular with collectors. But I think, I don't know, and I don't think Eric knew exactly why Topps made the decision. But I think either he or others in the comments, or just my personal thoughts, are that I would not be surprised if it was pushback from those in the ultra modern side of the hobby saying, hey, these black parallels are hard to gem when they get sent in for grading. And Topps decided, hey, okay, we'll just get rid of the black parallels because we don't want some of that pushback of saying, hey, these these certain parallels here are hard to gem. Keep sending them in, and then you only get 8s or 9s, and I really need 10s. And I think there was a little bit of a frustration or possibly pushback. I could be wrong. The other thing is the ability for Topps and Fanatics, and to some extent Panini. I don't want to forget Panini in here, because they still are a player still, I think, or will be in 2025, is meeting the expectations of those flippers and investors that make up a large part of that section of the hobby. I think it seems to be growing, at least my perceptions over the last couple years, that when people send in cards for grading, they purchase cards at a certain price level, and their expectation is that those cards are going to gem out, meaning get a 10, and would be able to flip for a certain profit. And heaven forbid, if they should get an 8 or a 9, that screws up their whole model for being able to flip or invest in cards. And I think there's been some growing, or there will be some growing pushback in that area. So I foresee, as my little bit of a prediction here, more of a prediction, I guess, is I think there's going to be a growing battle between the flippers and investors, the grading companies, and how consistent or inconsistent they are in grading cards a Gem Mint 10, and the quality control that Topps and Fanatics will have in their products. It seems to me that, and I don't necessarily believe in this. Okay, these are some of my thoughts that I have, that there appears to be more of a growing demand, not interest, but more of a demand that every single card that's pulled from a pack should Gem Mint. I don't think that's reasonable, but and again, I could be all wrong, but it just seems that there's a growing pushback, again, with the grading companies and with Topps and Fanatics and Panini as well. I saw something about someone was really complaining about, I think it was a Kaboom from Panini, that this was their flagship basketball product, I believe. And, they were off center and this or whatever. And they were complaining that, hey, there's no way that these cards are going to gem out. And I think there's, again, going to be a lot of pressure on Topps and Fanatics and the grading companies to meet the expectations of these flippers and investors on getting all these Gem Mint 10 cards. So we'll see how that plays out. And the last thing I want to talk about here on the ultra modern side of the hobby is Topps and Fanatics plan to 10x the hobby. What's that going to look like? Are there going to be new plans, initiatives, different ideas that they're going to come out with in 2025 with their goal of 10xing the hobby? As I understand, the Fanatics Fest will be held again in 2025. I think last year was the first time they did that. I think in general it was well received, but I think there was some criticism with that event. We'll see if they're able to make it an even better event this year, or whether there are some further criticisms. So it'll be interesting to see, again, in that aspect of Fanatics' goal to 10x the hobby, what new changes may come in the hobby to advance that goal. All right, on to vintage now. In general, I think there's going to be a stable to maybe slight softening of prices for most vintage cards. Obviously, I think there's going to be some vintage cards, certain players that may see some increase in prices. Don't know which ones, but there's always seems to be some that rise to the top, and others are more stagnant, and then some just seem to just drop down a little bit in pricing, which leads me to mention that I'm going to be working on updating my Vintage 100 index. I the last time I had the data was through, I think, June of 2024. So I have another 6 months of data to add to my various indexes. So I'm going to be working on that. It may take me a month or so. There's thousands of data points for me to enter, but I'm going to include data for the remainder of 2024. And so when I'm able to do that video, it'll give me and hopefully you a little more insight into where some of these vintage cards are going in terms of their price. Are some cards and players again holding their value? Are there certain players where we're seeing a little uptick in their prices and others maybe falling a little bit? But in general, I think there's going to be a little bit more stability to prices, but I think there's again some that are going to be rising in price, and some may be dipping in price a little bit. In terms of grading, I think PSA is still going to be king, but I see in 2025 that SGC is going to continue to make some advances on PSA. They have a better turnaround time, I think a lower cost for grading, and I think ultimately that's still going to eat away at PSA's market share, although I think the discrepancy between the two is still fairly large. But in 2025, I see that gap narrowing a little bit. I know there's a lot of you out there that really like the customer service, the turnaround time, the cost for SGC grading, and there's others like myself that still do prefer PSA and are willing to wait a little bit longer and spend a little bit more money to get their cards graded through PSA. Last two things here. I think the National this year will be well attended and may break another record. I know they added additional space, I think, up on the second floor for new dealers that haven't been able to get space in prior Nationals. So with more dealers, there's more available cards. It's back in Chicago. So I think that's a very popular place for the National. So I could see that the National could hit another attendance record. And finally, I think vintage is still going to remain a large part of the hobby. I don't see people flocking away in 2025 from vintage. I don't know how many new collectors there'll be that enter the vintage side of the hobby, but I don't see any issues in 2025 with vintage still playing a big part within the hobby. So those are my predictions or things to keep an eye out for in 2025 when it comes to the hobby. Would love to know in the comments what are your thoughts or reactions to what I have said here in the video. And with that, that's all I have for you. So until next time, thanks for watching.